Hello, today I will be covering Passage 1 out of the Science section of the second test in the official ACT Prep Guide. For the Science section, I like to quickly skim over anything in the passage and any of the figures, and then go to the questions to see what we need to examine in more detail. So please pause the video and read at your own pace. Alright, it looks like we're dealing with a genealogy tree here, and we have some information. Even if you don't know anything about gene trees, we have a key, a legend here, that helps us understand what's going on. Let's go on to the questions. Our first question asks, how many generations are shown in the figure? And the options are A, 3, B, 4, C, 22, or D, 24. So the main question is here, what is a generation and how many are there? Let's scroll on up and see if there are any hints in the passage. Maybe you already know, but let's see if they present any additional information. Each individual is represented with a number. Okay? And it looks like there's no mention in the paragraph, but there's a hint here in the key that if the square and the circle mate and produce offspring, it goes down one level. So that, coupled with the idea that each individual is given a number, we said that these numbers in each shape corresponds to individuals, not generations. So we know that the correct answers are not C or D, and it's either A or B. So now we just need to count the number of generations. So imagine you're number 20, and you have your mom and your dad here, and then your grandma and grandpa up here, and then your great-grandma and grandpa here. We have 1, 2, 3, 4 generations here. So the correct answer is B, 4. Question 2 says, based on the figure, the two individuals in which of the following pairs most likely have the greatest genetic similarity across their genomes? Then we have a few different pairs of individuals. So let's go through them one by one and see how much genetic similarity we think they will have. Now there's kind of an interesting subtlety here in that genetic similarity doesn't necessarily mean trait G similarity. Maybe genetic similarity is just how close they are in the family tree. So let's go look at the figure. The first one is F, which is individual 3 and 4. So we have here 3 and 4, and that's a male and a female. And so these are two people who had a kid, and they may or may not be in any way related to each other. In fact, they're probably not, given how this normally works. So F is probably out. G is 12 and 13. Alright, so these are two sisters. So they probably have a pretty similar genetic makeup because they come from the same parents, they're both sisters, and they both do not have trait G. So G is a good contender. Let's check H and J. H has individuals 16 and 24. So 16 is here, and then 24 is here. So you have to go to a sibling and then down one level, and then they're connected here. So that's not a strong connection at all. And the last one, J here, individual 18 and 21. You see 18 here and 21 here. Okay, they share the same great-grandparent, but nothing else. So their genetic makeup is probably pretty different. And we can see that 12 and 13, because they were sisters and they have the same no trait G fact here, that they probably have the most similar genetic makeup. So here, G is the correct answer. Question 3, says, suppose that individual 23 and individual 24 have 4 biological children. Based on the figure, how many of the children, if any, have trait G? And we have options ranging from 0 to all of them, 4. So let's take a look at individuals 23 and 24. Okay, they're right here. They're connected, and they have trait G. Both of them do. So what does that mean? From the passage, we can understand more about trait G here, and we have to scroll up and do a little reading. So the presence of trait G is an individual. It's entirely determined by gene G, and it can be uppercase, which is dominant, or lowercase, which is recessive. Now the interesting nugget of information here is near the end of the second paragraph. Scientists determined that the gene capital G genotype of individual 20 is lowercase gg, and the gene genotype of 21 is uppercase G and G. They concluded that trait G is a recessive trait. So what does that mean? Let's scroll on down. Individual 20 here has trait G, and they are two lowercase g's. Individual 21 does not have trait G, and they have an uppercase and a lowercase g. So in order to have trait G, because it's recessive, you need to have both of your alleles be lowercase g. And if any of them, if the first or the second or both of them are uppercase G, then you do not have trait G, because trait G is a recessive trait. Now I know that seems a little tough. You can also think of it like the not having trait G is a stronger effect than having trait G because trait G is a recessive trait. So if there are any capital G's in your genome, then you will not have trait G. So let's take a look at 23 and 24. They both have trait G, and because it's a recessive trait, we know that they both have both lowercase g's in their genomes. So therefore, if you take any combination, they will also always be all lowercase. So in this case, that means that all of their children, all four of them, will have trait G. So here D is the correct answer. Question 4 says, according to the figure, how many of the grandchildren of individual 1 and individual 2, if any, have trait G? So let's go to the figure and examine. Up here are 1 and 2. One level below them are their children, and one level below them are the grandchildren of 1 and 2. The bottom level are the great-grandchildren of 1 and 2, but we're interested in this case only of the grandchildren. Now there's an interesting subtlety here, in that only the people connected, like this, going down to here, are the grandchildren of 1 and 2. So if you look here, 10 and 11 you can trace up, and they go to 1 and 2, but 9 you can't trace up to 1 and 2, because that's somebody else, not from this bloodline, who married into the family. Similarly, 17, 16, and 15 you can all trace up to the bloodline, but 8 you cannot. So now we're looking at just the grandchildren of individual 1 and individual 2, which is not the same as everybody in this row. We're trying to see who has trait G, which means the filled in circle in shape here, and we have 1, 2, 3 total people in the row, but remember, individual 9 is not part of the actual family, they married into it, and they're not actually a grandchild of 1 and 2. So we just have 10 and 16, which is a total of 2 individuals. So the correct answer here is H. Question 5 says, based on the figure, is it likely that trait G is a sex-linked trait? Now, you may have no knowledge about what a sex-linked trait is, or what that even means, and frankly, neither do I, so let's take a look at the answers here and try to better understand what they're asking. A says, yes, because mothers with trait G always pass trait G to their sons. And all the others have something similar. It's either yes or no, or they always passed or did not always passed or did not always pass. So it appears that a link between the mother and their son is how we determine if it's a sex-linked trait. So let's go over and take a look at all the mothers and then look at what their sons have regarding trait G. Here's one mother, individual 4, and she does have trait G, and she has one son and one daughter, and the son does not have trait G. Okay, that tells us something, that A is not correct because mothers with trait G do not always pass trait G down to their sons. And that also means that C is incorrect because the same reasoning. Let's look now at individual 10, who is another mother with trait G, who has 2 daughters and 1 son. Individual 20 here does indeed have trait G, so that reinforces that A and C are not correct. It's either B or D because they don't always pass trait G, but sometimes they may pass trait G. Now let's think about what that means. If the mother passes it to the son, not here, but they do here, and let's see if there are any other examples. Over here there's a mom without trait G who passes it on to her son. So it really seems like it's not necessarily a sex-linked trait because either the mom has it and it doesn't get passed on, or the mom doesn't have it and it somehow does get passed on. So here the correct answer is D, no, because mothers with trait G did not always pass trait G onto their sons. Our last question for this passage, question 6, says, based on the information provided, will an individual with the gene G genotype, capital G, lowercase g, have trait G? And our options are yes, no, and because they have a dominant trait, or because it's a recessive trait. So capital G, lowercase g, will they have trait G? Let's scroll up to the paragraph and examine the second paragraph in particular, because that's the important part here. Scientists determined that the gene G genotype of individual 20 is 2 lowercase g's, and that the gene G genotype of individual 21 is uppercase lowercase g. So this is exactly what we need to investigate. We have one upper and one lower g, and that's individual 21. So we look at 21, and that person does not have trait G. So based on this figure and the information in the paragraph, will an individual with uppercase lowercase g have trait G? The answer is no, because one individual with that genotype, individual 21, does not have trait G. So it's either H or J, because we know it's not yes. And is it because trait G is a dominant or trait G is a recessive trait? You may remember this, but let's look up here at the top. They concluded that trait G is a recessive trait. So here the correct answer is J. Alright, we're done with this passage, and let's recap what we've learned. If you've never seen a genealogy chart before, this may have been somewhat confusing for you. Luckily, they provided a legend with information about the trait, how it's passed down, and what the male and the female keys are. Here we had 4 generations, and we're able to look at how trait G is passed down between them. One of the most important things here is understanding what the question is asking, so we can go back and look at the figure, or the paragraph in detail. There's no information that you need to answer these questions that's not somewhere in this figure, or in the paragraphs, or hidden in the questions, as we saw here. Question 5, you may not know what a sex-linked trait is, but you can kind of piece it together by looking at the available answers. So I hope this was helpful. Thank you for watching.